We also have changes to the shear strength. Now, shear strength, remember, is a measure of the power of the resisting forces to keep that material in place at the top of the slope. Things can happen that can cause that strength to be weakened. There are a lot of things. One of them is excess rainfall. You get too much water. Water adds a lot of problems. The more water you have, the less cohesion. When you have more water, it builds a fluid pressure. There's a water pressure. And that water pressure will actually push the individual particles away from each other. That's the opposite of cohesion. Water can also make some materials swell and expand. There are clays, and especially organic soil, that in the presence of water, they can expand several times their volume. Soil, for example, organic rich soils can expand 10 times their volume with water. There are some clays that can expand up to 1,000 times their volume. They soak up water just like a sponge. And as they swell and expand, they push out the slope, and that can make the slope steeper. And with a steeper slope, you have stronger gravity. Water weighs a little more than 8 1/4 pounds per gallon. So when that water is not draining out of that material, it's staying there, it's adding mass, it's adding weight. And that shear strength is going to have to be stronger to hold that extra material, that extra mass in place. When's the last time you caught your foot or your heel on dry dirt and fell? Check it every day. When's the last time you caught your foot on wet mud and took a header? You know, down you go, right? That water, when it gets into that clay, it completely just turns that clay to snot. And it just gets really, really loose and slick. Clays lose almost their entire shear strength when they get water saturated. They have no support at all. And if there's something on top of the clay, when the clay gets wet, it'll slide. That clay has no ability to keep that material in place. It acts almost as a lubricant when it gets wet. So too much water can be a problem, whether that's from flooding, rainfall, snow melt. Some decades ago in California, there was a guy who left on vacation, and he forgot to turn his sprinkler system off. And so his sprinkler system ran for like 2 weeks, and it soaked the material at the top of the slope, and he triggered a mass wasting event that took out houses at the bottom of the hill. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, regardless of where that water's at, it can cause problems. You know, you've seen, I'm sure, in the news and whatnot, places where there's been flooding and like the road's been washed out and things have slid. Because what happens, the material underneath the road gets too wet. And it has waste that falls away and then the road falls in on top. So too much water is a big problem. Changes to the slope steepness. Changes in steepness and in load. Load is extra mass. I made a mistake one year. Actually, I was dumb enough to do this 2 years in a row. But I did the whole Black Friday thing with my 3 sisters. I was the chauffeurette, and I was the, I don't like to shop. So I was the, here, stand in line, and we'll bring you stuff. Go check out. And I was like the stand in place, you know. Yeah, it was a very good idea. For somebody else. And then it was, carry this, carry that, bring this out to the car. And I'm like, okay, that's a coffee maker, a blender, and sewing machine, and okay, you got 9 boxes this big. I'm supposed to carry these to the car myself. Extra load. You know, it gets pretty heavy.
Did they at least let you put out your own gifts?
No, they didn't. They went shopping without me for that one. But changes in load. You add mass, you add weight to the top of the slope, that shear strength is going to have to be stronger to keep it in place. And unfortunately, a lot of that is caused by us, a lot of human activity. We do that. So you have a nice mountainside, you know, you got the trees, you know, and, you know, all that. Maybe you have a lake down here, you have the sunrise, and, you know, the birds that are in such a beautiful view and TV. And you want to put a road through here, like maybe a scenic parkway. So we go in there with a bunch of equipment, some dynamite, and we blast our way through the mountain, and we put in a road. Well, in doing that, we've left behind a very artificially steep slope. The steeper that slope, the stronger the gravity. There's less support for this material up here. We call that cut. And, you know, if you've ever bought anything on the internet lately and had to pay the shipping costs, you may have noticed that, you know, the shipping is starting to get more expensive than the item you bought lately. You've been noticing that? That's going to get worse towards the holidays because there is a nationwide deficit of truck drivers. So if you're looking for a good career you like to drive, it might be worth looking into because every company in this country is looking for drivers. They don't have enough drivers. So it's not a good lot. Lovely. Yeah. You ever ship rock? That's heavy. So when you cut and blast all that material out of there to make the road, it's got to go somewhere. You have to haul it somewhere. That costs a lot of money. But what we've done in the past, and still occasionally do today, is we look at this and go, wow, that's a beautiful view. Let's take that material, we'll dump it here. We call that fill. And we'll dump it there so we don't have to haul it. And that will build up a nice flat space so we can put houses on it. Good. So here, we've artificially steepened the slope. The slope's too steep. That's made that dangerous. Here, not only have we steepened the slope, but we've added load, we've added weight to the top. Yeah, that's a brainchild right there. And eventually that'll, you know, be in the They want to be close to the water. Well, they will be. We do things like that way too frequently. But then the alternative, how do you do this safely? Well, to do this safely, you need to terrace this. You need to stair-step it back. Keep the slope at a minimum. Give that slope extra support by adding retaining walls. Put in some drain pipes to keep the extra water out. And then plant vegetation to help anchor the material in place and to help absorb water and make it look good. How much extra do you think that would cost? A lot. And a lot of extra time. Oh, you all know that time is money. Because you know if you're going to be saying, if you're driving by here for a year, 2 years, 3 years, we're going to be done with this, right? Yeah, it's going to take a while. And then do that and then not do this.
They don't do that. They would probably still do that because they would see the money. If someone owns that land, more profit by building houses.
No, they would expect these people to carry insurance. Yeah, that's we do that. Yeah. So you change steepness, you change the load, you change the shear strength. You're giving gravity an opportunity to win. You're tipping the hand towards gravity. Removal of vegetation is another issue. That vegetation is helping with cohesion. It's helping to keep that material in place. A lot of construction practices, a lot of mining practices, logging, forestry, not so much today in this country as it used to be. But, you know, if we look at the actual ripping up of trees and vegetation, and that loosens the material and completely destroys cohesion. So that can definitely, and it frequently does, lead to episodes of mass wasting. Some of them can be quite devastating. Any questions? So we have our 4 criteria of mass wasting. The what moved, where did it move, how did it move, and how fast did it move. Those criteria are going to give us 3 main types of mass wasting events. We have falls, slides, and flows. Falls are usually pretty fast. They occur at whatever speed that material builds up and falling from the top to the bottom. The farther that material has to fall, get to the bottom, the faster it's going to be going when it gets there. Falls are typically large chunks of rock basically falling from the top of a cliff or the top of an overhang to the bottom. Let's say vertical or nearly vertical, depends on the slope. Fall of rocks. We call that a rock fall. And if you've been on South 75 in Cincinnati, over the river in northern Kentucky, we have the big road cuts with the big walls of rock on either side of the highway where they blasted through for the road. There will be signs, rock falls, rock falls. I hate those signs. Well, go around. Well, that's why I hate these signs, because I don't know if that means the fall's already happened, or if they're up there waiting for me. You know, like, here she comes, here she comes, here she comes. Go, girl, go, go, go! You know, I just do 90.
Just go fast.
I don't like bridges either, so I go over that bridge on the Ohio River like 100. Why? Get me off the bridge! It does. Badly. It should have been replaced like in 75, but you know, it's not. So rockfall, and we see these, especially on 75, because in this part of the country, we tend to have nice, somewhat horizontal layers of rock, but they alternate in type. And you will frequently have layers of limestone alternating with layers of shale. Now, limestone and shale are both sedimentary rock. You'll be seeing them in lab this week and next. Well, next week, the week after. Limestone is made mostly of calcite. We use calcite to make cement and concrete with. So limestone is a rather durable rock. It will withstand weathering quite well for a long time. Shale, on the other hand, is a sedimentary rock made mostly of clay and mud. When shale gets wet, it all goes back to clay. And when clays get wet, they get all muddy and gross and slippery and snotty, and they slide out. So in a wet climate like ours, what's happened over time is that the shale, which is a bit of a weaker rock, has less resistance, gets all washed away. And you'll end up with the development of these caves and recesses back into the shale. I would not recommend standing either. Not so much. What happens over time is that shale, so much of that can be removed by weathering and erosion that you end up with not enough support for the layer of limestone above it. So it'll crack and break into pieces and go falling to the bottom and onto the road. That's how you get your rock falls. In mountainous regions, your rock falls are usually triggered by frost action. You have freeze and thaw between night and day and between seasons. up at higher elevations. The water gets into the cracks and crevices. And over time, it's going to break up the rock into pieces, and it's not going to be coherent enough as a unit to stay in place. So pieces break off and fall to the bottom. So then you have your slime rock fall. We try to fix this by putting multiple ways. One of the most common, you'll see this on 75. You can't see them going 90. You have to slow down a little bit. And you're doing this, looking, so you might want to have someone else drive so you don't go off the road. But they'll put these big sheets of, they look like chain link fence around the rock, and then they bolt it. It's bolted into the rocks at the top. And it's kind of like a big rock hairnet, so that when the rocks fall, that catches them and keeps them from falling out over the highway. It's rather effective, as long as the rock that falls isn't the one with the bolt in it. It takes the whole thing with it, and you have this big bunch of rocks wrapped up in chain link fence in the middle of the road. But it works pretty well. That's why I still. Now slides involve material of all types. Some types of avalanches are slides. So definitely slides can be in snow, can be oftentimes whole layers of rock, sometimes soil and very loose fine sediment like fine sand, silt, and clay. In a slide, the material typically moves like a unit. It moves if it's all one piece. It moves all together. Slides can be rather slow. You can sit there and watch them. Oh, there you go. There it is. Okay, it's moving. Wait. Yeah, no, it's moving. No, wait. Yeah, it's moving. Others can occur in a matter of minutes. You know, you look up the slope, and you turn your back, and whoosh, there it is. It's gone. We have two main types of slides. We have translational, and we have rotational. Translational is a straight slide. Just like you would do, if you went down the slide on the playground. Well, old school slide, not these early few things they had to say. Just your basic, you get your ladder. And then that's the ladder with the whoosh, You know what I mean, right? You come down, right? That's a straight slide. Just whoosh, right down the line. That reminds me of it. You got time for you want a story? Got time for a story? When I was in like 7th or 8th grade, we were out on the playground. We were having this stupid obstacle course thing that the PE teacher had put together. And one of the things we had to do was go up this big slide and come down and then run and go through some tires or something stupid. And so she had told us many, many times, when you go down the slide, the other guys want to do fancy things and whatnot. It's really 7th grade. So just keep your legs on the slide. Don't hang your legs over the slide. Yeah. Well, there was this guy in class who was a little jerk. So, okay, whatever, dumb. So he went up the slide, and he was doing just exactly what she told him not to. And he had his legs hanging on the outside of the slide, so he went down. And this slide, the ladder, I'd say it was probably about at least 8 feet up, to get the ladder to the top. It's a big slide. And of course, he gets up there and he puts his big lanky legs over the side, right, like ha ha ha. Well, going down, these pole supports that are holding, the slide up, because this was back in the day, it was all metal. Forget that plastic stuff, right? And we didn't do wood chips. We didn't do wood chips in the 70s. It's asphalt. You were careful on the playground or you died. That was it. And so he came down and his ankle caught that pole and he went, whoop, smash. It just flipped it right out and whack, face first, right? Face planted on the thing. broke his nose, he was crying. Yeah, payback. Yeah. That's why she told us not to do that. Gosh, I can't believe I remember that. He was such a jerk. He was such a jerk.
That's a memorable life moment.
That is a memorable life moment.
Have you ever seen the guys, the person since then?
No. Gosh, no.
What time is it?
You remember when you faded that FaceTime? Oh, I'm sure that a lot of people remember. Remember Steve, his name was Steve. I think maybe under hypnosis I can remember his last name. Was it Steve something? Big tall lanky guy. Anyway. So, but that's a straight slide. This happens a lot with layers of rock. You have your situation like this road cut, but instead of the rocks being horizontal, here up in the mountains, these rocks have experienced folding and bending, so they're at an angle. They've been, they're in a big anticline or a big syncline, they've been folded. So when it rains and snows, the rain gets in here and it gets in between the layers. And you can get freeze and thaw and expansion, pushing those layers apart. And when those layers lose contact with each other, they lose friction, and they can slide. And you can get whole layers of rock breaking off and sliding pretty much as one piece down the side, to the bottom. That's called a rock slide. But we fixed this. We can fix this. We borrow techniques out of the mining industry to kind of shore this up a little bit. What we do is actually we take these big 4, 6, 8-inch diameter steel bolts and we bolt the rocks together. Boy, does that sound genius. So I should put these steel plates here, we'll drill a hole, and we will drive a steel steel bolt into the rock, tighten that up, the idea is to pull the layers together so they're back into contact with each other. One, to help improve the friction between them, keep them there, and two, to tighten that up to prevent water from getting in as easily. Because you have water, it's going to get in there anyway. Now in mining, this is very effective. It's been used for centuries to keep the ceilings of tunnels open and from collapsing, and to shore up the walls and tunnels. But if you're having to do this, that's telling you you shouldn't have put the road there in the first place. This is your last ditch. Oh my gosh, we've replaced this road 9 times. We got to do something because we're running out of funding to do it a 10th time. And we got to do something. This works for a while, but eventually that will slide. It will fail.
Then it will just all come in
And
a giant chunk.
John, you want bigger chunks, they're all bolted to each other. Or the rocks will move and they'll snap the bolts. They'll shear the bolts clean off and move to the bottom. I've seen 6-inch diameter steel bolts just snap off. Yeah.
So that's at that road level and above. What about below where they, what I'm talking about? Like if you're going down even farther, you still have a road going through it.
Yeah.
So the stuff below, obviously it's not bolted together, but that still separates below.
Yeah, well, it
the bottom
does.
still gets to it.
It does. But, if you're assuming that, you have, of course, yeah.
So would that hurt like the?
Well, if you have this situation where, you cut and you cut into it, then yeah, you can have this falling on this side too. And that'll take the road out from that as well.
But that can also take out the support if there's a.
Mm-hmm.
That's charming.
So realistically, it's only a good solution to put the road there, but it's not a good solution in the long run.
Not a good long-term decision, no. No, we do a lot of that. The Smoky Mountains Scenic Parkway through Tennessee, I think it's an absolute failure. They were trying to build that back in the 80s and early 90s. Landslides almost every weekend. They had to really do a lot on that road, the road through, and I wouldn't drive on it today. But I've been up there. They built much of it through rock called turbidite, which when it gets wet, it just all falls apart. And they had engineers design the road, but if they had asked any geologists, we would have told them that's going to go back to sediment as soon as it gets wet. But they didn't listen to us. They didn't ask us, they asked an engineer, and that's what they got. Not a lot of love lost between engineers and scientists. We need to communicate better. We spend a lot of our time with, I'm right, no, I'm right, no, I'm right, no, I'm right. That, not a whole lot gets done that way. That's a translational slide. We can also have rotational. Rotational means there's been some spin. We'll see this happen a lot in material that's very fine silt, fine sand, soil, that gets water saturated, that gets soaked with water. I know. That's going to bother me now. Steve, that was his name. You have a slope in front of the tree. And when it rains, especially if you get a lot of heavy rain, either a heavy rain in a short period of time, or you get just continuous rain over like a week, that rain soaks into that material. And of course it's water, it's going to go to the bottom. And the material at the bottom gets really, really soaked with water. It's really, really wet. Too much water destroys cohesion. Now, material just gets to be this soupy, wet material at the bottom. It's not going to be able to support the weight of the material that's on top of it. In fact, the weight of the overlying material will squeeze that super wet stuff right out from under there. And it'll just, I don't know if it makes that noise or not, but it'll just come right out of there. Just like catch it back in, right? So the weight takes this really wet stuff and it'll split it out. It's kicked out. Then you're left with a hole back here. This has no support, so it falls. And you get a spin. So what you'll be left with is you're left with something like this, a big pile of stuff like this. Here's your tree. That's got some really good roots. So there's a spin of a rotation. You're often left with this steep-sided cliff-like feature. It's called a scarp. That's basically the scar where the material broke free and fell. That's where it broke loose. These rotational slides are called slumps. And there's a classic slump in your book. This thing had slumped, and has slumped before, and has slumped before that. It's been slumping for centuries. It will slump next year. It will slump again the year after that. But, people still live there. And it's on page, it's in the middle here. Page 592. This is La Conchita, California. Now, this, they refer to it as a mudslide, they refer to it as a re-slide. It's essentially a slump. Material got really, really wet, and it kicked out of the bottom, and the top fell. This material here is predominantly fine sand, fine silt, really fine material. It's hard to tell from the picture that this grassy slope is 60 to 80 feet tall. It's just, you know, it's like that, it's just straight up almost. It's just like this. It's like, you know, like 80 feet. Straight up. And see, back in the 1800s, there was a railroad here. A railroad. And at least once a year, sometimes more, the railroad company would have to go in there and, yes, never even down with the chair. They'd have to go in there with equipment, a bunch of men, and dig out the railway tracks from underneath all the slump material. They'd have to clean up the tracks, they'd have to fix them, and they'd have to do that, you know, at least once a year. Storms would come in and whatnot, and the material would get wet in the slump. Well, getting into the 1940s, 1950s, when we start putting highways everywhere, and interstate trucking really starts getting off, it becomes too expensive for the railroad to keep doing this, because interstate trucking, that transit is more efficient, it's cheaper for short distances, and the railroad's losing money. So they're like, well, forget this, we're abandoning this. So they went to the city and they said, hey, do you guys want to buy this land from us? Yeah. Yeah, we'll buy this, okay. Of course, you know, all right. So the land was purchased from the railroad, and of course, right away, they built La Quintita. Some of these homes, you can see in the picture, some of these homes, it's like you look out of your kitchen window and this is the hill. This is always it's there. Why would people want to live with this look? It's hard to picture Ohio, but you leave this building. Well, you don't do it now, but you leave this building, you walk, what, a block and a half down the street, and you're at the beautiful banks of the Great Miami River. Wow, cool. Okay? For comparison. In La Conchita, you walk out your front door, and you walk a block, maybe 2 blocks, and you're on the beach of the freaking Pacific Ocean. Okay? You know, in California, you know, the sun and the bird, and, you know, let's see what else we got. We got like a dolphin out here or something, you know, this is not, you know, wow, cool, everyone wants to live there. Who would not want beachfront property in Southern California? A block from the ocean. So yeah, the city bought this land because, you know, it's moving, right? But this thing gets wet and it slumps and you lose homes, and sometimes, unfortunately, you lose lives. 2005, the last time we had a major mass wasting in La Conchita, we lost, I think, like 10, 12 people. More than a dozen people were injured, and those homes are gone. And of course, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was governor at the time, said, well, this will never happen again. I'm in my living room in despair. I see that. Yeah. Do you think the state of Ohio has more money than California? Borrows money from us. Yeah, they can't afford this. How would you fix this 80-foot monster? The best way, the surefire way, is to tell these people, get the hell out of here. You can't live here. This is unsafe. But, you know, you can't really tell people that. You can require that they be insured, that they carry insurance, and you can require that if your house is destroyed, then you can rebuild, but you cannot rebuild here. You can make those kind of mandates. But people are going to pony up and take the risk because they're a block from the freaking ocean. Okay, and that's a huge. So how do we fix this? We have to go in there and stair step that whole slope. It's all loose sand, so it can't hold itself up. We have to put in retaining walls. Water's the problem, so we have to put in horizontal drainage pipe to keep the excess water out of it. And then, of course, replant vegetation. And on a slope that big in La Conchita, that's easily a multi-billion-dollar project. Yeah, let me write a check. Arnold could probably, maybe, I don't know. So that's a slump.
What you're kind of describing kind of reminds me when I worked in Colorado.
Yeah.
Colorado Springs is kind of like that.
Yeah, they have a lot of
Legitimately, you've got out the back of the barracks,
Mhm.
and
There it is.
literally it's like that. And it's snow all on top of it.
Oh, yeah. So snow adds weight, is a load, and when it melts, it adds water. I understand. Definitely Rio. Oh, is that Rio? Where is that? I think it's Rio. Where they have the mountains. They'll have mountains that are literally like that steep, and they'll put hotels just on the mountains, you know, like this. And it's like, really? Really? Yeah. I don't. It won't work for long. I know that much.
That's how a lot of skiers are.
Sure, yeah, I know.
Colorado, and all of that.
I'm not doing that.
And that's what people go on to experience. So.
I guess so. Go to the roof. You might have a chance. And again, speaking of snow, many types of avalanches are translational slides. But we have ways to help protect against avalanches. One I've already mentioned before, we blast. You get out there early in the morning with mortar rounds, usually bought from an old army supply somewhere, and they'll use rocket launchers and mortar launchers from like Korea, and to blow up stuff. And they'll shoot at the snow. Now, with experienced geologists and people that have been trained in doing this will understand through time what areas of the mountain are going to be most likely to have avalanches. And they'll go and they'll set off the avalanches on purpose to try to remove all that weak snow before the skiers come. But there's an easier way to do that. If you've ever been in the mountains, again, it's hard to relate being in Ohio. But you go up in the mountains, and you have these big mountains, and you're driving by, and you see these, they got these beautiful trees. You know, they got trees going up the mountains. And we got these orange trees. But the trees don't cover the whole mountain. There are areas on the mountain where there are no trees. And you see in the past and in the present, developers look at that, and cities and communities looking for tourist revenue look at that and they go, oh my gosh, we can put a ski thing in here. We put, chalet up here and have the thing, with the what do you call it, the ski lift thing going up. And we don't have to remove any trees or anything. It's just go ahead and put it there. Why are there no trees there? These areas are called avalanche chutes. There are no trees there because that's where the avalanches go. And apparently they happen there frequently enough that trees don't get very old there. They get taken out in the avalanche. Yeah. See, we're looking at that as a matter of natural convenience. And nature's like, no, that's because I'm using that for, okay, never mind.
Maybe we rethink everyone's stuff.
Don't hit the slopes on a beautiful, sunny, blue sky day. Go on a crappy day. It's the sun. The sun, the energy melts or weakens snow layers, and that's what can trigger an avalanche. You get the melting of weakened layers in the snow from the sun, and the whole thing slides. Yeah, you go when it's overcast and cloudy and disgusting.
Most places are smart, close, bullets,
Yeah, well. Now, you don't have to worry about that so much like, Duck Mountain, but it happens. Yeah, don't have to worry about Catherine Mountain. I've fallen down steps steeper than Catherine Mountain. Oh my gosh, let's get some flows. Flows, okay. Lots and lots of types of flows. Some of the major ones, we got mud flows, And then a few of the big ones here. Debris flows, and we got a creek. Creek's a flow. Creek is a flow. Now, mass wasting flows. The word means, or is trying to imply, that the material moves essentially as a unit. And it moves as though it's a fluid. Flows do not have to be wet. They can be dry. But they will move as a unit. They will move as if they're liquid. Mud flows are very common. They're triggered primarily by sudden heavy rainfall. We get them a lot through with increasing frequency in recent decades throughout Southeast Asia, Philippines, Indonesia, mostly because of illegal timber harvesting has taken the vegetation off the slopes. They get these little storms every now and then called typhoons that come through and dump a lot of rain. They get annual monsoon rain. And without the trees to help with cohesion, stuff just comes right down the slope. Mud flows are a lot like avalanches. Once that material stops moving, whatever water or air was in it all comes out. And that material will pack solid. People that get trapped in mud flows typically die of one of two things. They either suffocate or they are battered to death. They die from blunt force trauma. And unless you are near the first 10 or 12 feet max of that mud flow, you're never getting dug out of there. Because again, once it stops moving, it packs solid. Devastating. Absolutely devastating. Mud flows. There's a terrifying mud flow in the Virginias, especially on the east side of Virginia, getting into Maryland. Back in the 1960s, my favorite hurricane, I guess we all have our favorite disasters, it was Hurricane Camille in 1969. Hurricane Camille was a nasty storm. She hit the Mississippi coast roughly in the same place that Katrina did, which is one of the reasons why forecasters, when Katrina was coming to shore, they were trying to convince people of the severity of Katrina by comparing her to Camille. Oftentimes they have said that she's going to be at least as bad, if not worse, than Camille. We're trying to get people, spark some memory to get people to remember, oh my gosh, I remember Camille, let's get the hell out of here. But you know, that's a lot of time between 1969 and 2005. And you know, there weren't, unfortunately, enough people that remembered to tell the younger people, dude, we were here, we were there, we don't want to be here, let's get out. And you see that a lot with natural disasters. If you lose that personal connection with the past, then people tend to be more lax about doing what they need to do to keep themselves safe. They downplay the severity. But anyway, Camille came through. She had sustained winds in excess of 150 miles an hour. She had wind gusts above at least 238 miles an hour. Wind gusts are probably higher than that, but we don't know how much higher because the recording instruments were blown off the roof. So they recorded as the last recording. There it goes. That thing spins. Yeah, it's gone. Okay, it's gone. Gone.
Did they end up saying Katrina was more?
She was about the same, but since '69 there had been so much new development in areas where there shouldn't have been, that caused most of the problems. A lot more devastation. So anyway, so Camille came up the Mississippi Valley. She came through us, came through southern Ohio. We had a lot of extensive flooding, rainfall, that she kicked out east and then over the Appalachian Mountains, over West Virginia, where she dumped in some areas over a foot of rain in less than 6 hours. And that triggered massive mud flows in eastern Virginia that killed well over 200 people. And then she got kicked out to the Atlantic and died. She was a nasty. Never use that name again. Unless she's a creature. She came ashore, she took names, and she left. So those are mud flows. The nice thing about mud flows, they tend to follow pre-existing valleys and rivers. So before one happens, typically you can get a pretty doggone good idea where it's going to go ahead of time. So that when it looks like one's going to happen, you know who to give evacuation warnings to, who to give advisories to, what communities to tell, hey, you should be on the lookout, you may get a mud flow, watch the weather, that kind of thing. So that's helpful. Debris flows, like the one I talked about on Tuesday in Peru, 1970, that just involves everything. Snow, rock, dirt, soil, trees, whatever. They can move devastatingly fast. Mud flows can move easily at 35 to 60 miles per hour. Debris flows have been clocked in some instances well over 100 miles an hour. And then there's creep. Creep can happen anywhere. And it can happen on almost completely flat slopes. We have a big problem with creep here in the Midwest. You have, maybe in your neighborhood, somewhere where you grew up or whatever, you have a sidewalk here, and you had a wall. One of the neighbors, or maybe you had a wall at the end of your yard, and you were a little kid. You'd walk on top of the wall while your mom or dad held your hand. And when you got older, you could do it yourself. And, get off my wall! That kind of thing. And then by the time you got into high school, walking back and forth, you may have noticed that wow, that wall is kind of leaning. And then you go away to college, you come back after college for a few years, and it's leaning a little more. Man, they're going to have to replace that. You go off and you get married, you come home for Thanksgiving, and you notice that they're rebuilding the wall. That's creep. Creep's doing that. If you have trees on a hillside that are leaning, that's creep. If you have a fence that's leaning downhill, that's creep. If you have a patio or porch steps or a deck, and you're noticing it's starting to pull away from the rest of the house, you're getting a gap between the houses, that's creep.
That'd be the same thing as curves on the road, right?
Yeah.
And
They start to fall over, but that's creep. It cracks. What happens is that in the wintertime, the moisture in your soil freezes. What does water do when it freezes? It expands. So when that water in the soil freezes, your whole yard heaves upward, it expands upward. Now that's of course greatly magnified, that's your soil particle. Greatly magnified, of course. So that pushes that particle up. When that ground thaws and that soil drops back down, is it going to drop back down into the same spot or into a spot a little bit downhill? It's going to drop here. Freeze, thaw. Freeze, thaw. So over time, moving at fractions of an inch per year, per season, that whole yard is slowly slurping towards the sidewalk. And it's piling up against that wall, and the weight of it is going to push the wall over. But that could take decades before that happens. Once you're going through it, you go, man, that wall, man, we got to fix that wall. Okay, well, let's see, we got to fix the wall. What do we need to do? Well, you need to take the old wall down and get rid of it. Take the old wall down, get rid of it. You need to go in and regrade that material. You don't want this problem to happen again, so water's the culprit. So you need to put in some perforated drain pipe to keep the excess water out. And then you have to rebuild the wall. That's what creep does. It causes severe structural damage. The house I grew up in, my dad, I was so happy when I was 12 years old, he taught me how to use the lawnmower. I was like, oh my gosh, his Toro, no one touched his Toro. Right? I was felt so proud of myself, I was all grown up. No, he wanted me to mow the lawn every Saturday. didn't that too many, once he taught me how to do it, right? Well, he also taught me how to use the edger. Now again, this is the 1970s, so someone was going no, it's this wheel of teeth on the end of a pole, and yeah, that was the edger. And the semi-lawn freak that my dad was, he had a hill that came down off the backyard into the alley. And I would cut 4 to 6 inches of dirt and grass off the bottom of that slope every summer. The backyard was slowly inching down that slope and spilling out into the alley. In our kitchen, the house was, kind of like this, and then the kitchen was kind of, separate. And there was a crack that developed across the ceiling of the kitchen, roughly where the kitchen connected to the rest of the house. And I had noticed through my 27 years of living there that the crack was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'm like, I think that's pretty. Yeah. That yard was pulling the kitchen with it towards the alley. And I know every year, those kitchen steps, my dad would have to come in and pour extra concrete in between the gap because it was pulling that. So when the landlady passed away, her sons sold the house, and they gave us some money to paint. Kind of looks spiffy, right? So we're like, okay. So we spattled cracks in the kitchen and painted and bye. And they put a for sale sign up, and now it's somebody else's problem. To actually fix that, you'd have to tear down that kitchen, replace and repair whatever structural damage was there, put in your drain pipes, reconstruct. But those are things you look for when you're looking to buy a house.
Is that when people drain under their driveways?
In many cases, yes. Yeah, it's to keep that from moving, from slurping. But then it'll put holes, and it'll crack up all your asphalt and your cement, and you have to replace it. Have to be a mess. Those pipes might also be dry wells that drain the gutter runoff underground and out to the street rather than just onto the yard and out.
Look at my driveway goes like this, and I have a big tube that goes under it. Like, as you go down the yard, it's got a slant with the street there.
Yeah.
You can see just the soil itself over time kind of been more like that.
All of your mass wasting, your terrifying debris flows, your avalanches, your mud flows, all of these devastating events that cause massive property damage, injury, death, all of these mass wasting events combine, and creep yearly is the highest economic loss. It's slow, but it's insidious. By the time you start realizing, where's that crack coming from? By the time you realize the damage that creep has been causing, it's already been occurring for decades. And by the time you notice it, you may be into some serious coin to fix it. And it could be quite dangerous.
Oh my gosh, I was thinking of the crack in my diamond ceiling, just to get bigger.
Potentially, yes. It could be from creep.
I'll move it out.
It could be from creep. Depending on the age of the house, it might be a drywall or plaster.
You can drywall, but the people, it was my grandparents' house before it was my mom's house.
Yeah.
And they bought it from the people who decided they were going to get their friends together and build it themselves. So it's kind of leaving money.
Oh.
And it's on a hill.
Oh, well, it's on a hill. You got creep.
And we get lots of water.
Yeah, you got creep. Sorry. You got creep. Yeah. Baffle and for sale sign.
We repainted it.
Yeah, then you go to run. You fill it in, just like my dad just fill it in and run.
We got a few years, right?
Yeah, a few years. Yes, questions?
So, my uncle's house, like on the street, there's like a pipe between like the, where you park on the corner.
Uh-huh.
Is that the drain pipe that you were drawing?
It could be several things. Could be if you have, of course I don't know the age of your neighborhood, but when the neighborhood was developed, Oftentimes, they have to reroute streams and creeks. And they know that there'll be areas in the future that will collect water. So they'll put in what's called tiles, which are ceramic, they're terracotta tiles. They'll catch and channel water underground away from house foundations. And oftentimes that'll go to a pipe to the street. It could also be, like I told him, it could be what they call a dry well, where either you or someone in your neighborhood might have their gutters, either now or at one point in time. Instead of the gutters just dumping water down a downspout, the downspout went into a pipe that went underground to the street. But it could be part of that as well. It may or may not still be active. Any other questions? Are we ready to go to the basement and look for some trees? Okay. Let me tell you where we're going to go in case anybody gets lost. Holy cow.